Okay, so you've made some really, really good points and some good observations. Now we're going to extend to that. So now we're going to sort of focus on an area of the game, which is really important, and it ties into sort of mental skills as well. The idea and the focus has been, so far we've talked about fitness and getting to a certain level of fitness. I have normative data. There's actually an interview I do that comes out on Friday with a guy called Chris Barnes, and he, if you get a chance to listen to that interview, and I'll share it as well. It's I had to do pre-record because of work commitments, but if you get a chance to listen to that, he's sort of, because he's one of the pioneers in the world of fitness and football, since '97, when I think it was earlier than that, it was at Middlesbrough, and he's one of the pioneers, obviously. And you hear him talk about fitness and how important fitness testing is, and as used to monitor the training. But equally, what's really refreshing is he's not obviously the only person I speak to, but I mention him because you can hear on radio. But the point I'm trying to make here is the importance of monitoring your fitness, know where you're up to, and having the data to see where you're up to comparatively to where you need to be. Psychological components we've addressed on this program, we'll address again. We're revising now, as I mentioned earlier, because the COVID situation is what we would have proceeded with has changed slightly, because different challenges have presented themselves, and we've had to sort of change and adapt training. Technique and skill are key variables, obviously, too. But you can be the most technical player in the world, the most skilled in the world, and if all these variables are equal, then decision-making is key. That is the key. Now, I look at ways, one of the biggest differences, people have asked me, what are my thoughts on the differences between amateur and professional? Well, of all the people I've spoken to, a lot of the time people will say, all things being well here, all the variables being equal or there and thereabouts, then you start to think about the speed of decisions. That doesn't mean top professionals don't make wrong decisions. I mean, we saw earlier this week, I don't know if you saw the game, I watched on TV, it was the United game. Lingard makes a bad pass at the end, but obviously he recovered well in terms of, today he scored. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we see, it doesn't matter who, I'm not singling him or anybody else, I'm just saying even players at the highest level make mistakes. What they do is they're more consistent in doing the right thing and move things quicker. So it doesn't mean, but you do need a really strong technical base. And that's why it's really important, the time you've got now to really get things right technically. But the reality is that you want to turn that technique into skill. And the idea around that is to spend less time doing, well, the less time possible on opposed training to opposed training, because obviously then you've got to turn it to skills. So consistency is key. Now, you receive the ball, prior to receiving the ball, you want to get in a situation you can assess your options. You're receiving the ball and assessing your options. You might receive it and reassess your options. You're receiving it and you're assessing your option. And we talked about this earlier, that you've got that 2 to 5 seconds between receiving and the player closing you down. Even less, you make a really quick decision. So small-sided games, and that's the key. The academy has a strong emphasis on that, because a higher tempo of the game, the speed, then you've got to make these quicker decisions. Now, obviously, the rules and regulations, I'm well aware. You've had to adapt, and I really want to commend you guys for showing a lot of strength and fantastic group and under the difficult situation, and keep going. We'll do the best we can in the situation we're in. Obviously, I can appreciate you doing the best you can in the situation you're in. The lockdown makes it harder to do the games, and we have finding ways to improvise. But one thing to sort of take in consideration, the key is really, prior to receiving the ball, these are some key fundamentals. Do you know what you're going to do with the ball? If you're ball watching, then there becomes an issue. You're focusing on the ball, you're not aware of what's going around. So if you know what you're going to do prior to receiving the ball, then you can assess. If you have to reassess and change, then fair enough, but you've got an idea. And we looked at that sort of show reel of Paul Scholes, and Tony didn't see that. Obviously, Tony only saw the last bit. When I asked you what you thought he did well, one of the first things Tony said was his ability to know what he's going to do prior to receiving the ball. And that was, as well as everything else he's got going for him, that is the key fundamental. So you could have the same technique, same skill level, but then do you know? And the idea really is, and the idea of today is to sort of find ways to improvise. So when the ball's played to you, some of the key things you need to be aware of: are you aware where your teammates are? Are you aware where the opposition is? Are you aware where the space is? The more aware you are, the quicker you can make decisions. And when you see players playing at an amateur level, or even, the higher you go, the more aware they are. Okay, but you've got to think, you can say, players at the highest level still make mistakes. Obviously they do, but it's a quicker game. And that's why I keep saying that you've got to play with players that are equal and better, that will improve you. That's why I've said over many years that I don't think it's a good idea that players who play in academies, centre excellences in the UK, then go on to play for their school teams, because it's not doing this any good really for them. And for you guys, obviously, you've got a great group now at the academy, a fantastic group of players. And I'm excited for when you can start playing again and training again, because with the group you've got, playing that intensity is going to bring you on. That's the key. So the idea behind the training, certainly when I've seen the training, I've been over to watch the training and seen, Tony and the coaches put the guys through their paces. One thing that's really evident for me is the sort of small side of game, really, really sharp. But the key point is that, you find ways, and it's not just about the game. You're aware why you're doing it in a game. So the games you play and the activities I talked to you about last week, the reaction time drills, the goal, and one of the goals we're aiming for is to improve the awareness. Now, when you've got your head up, you're thinking 5, 6 passes ahead of the play, that phase. And the reason why you're thinking 5 or 6 passes ahead at times is because, we'll touch on this shortly. If you think about it this way, guys, you look around you, then you look back down. In 5-10 seconds of you evaluating the situation, things aren't going to stay the same. Things are going to change. People are going to move, make runs, and so the more where you are, that's the key. So one thing we can start with, one takeaway we can start with, is getting in the habit. And you've probably heard this before from coaches and before, but it's really important to really focus on this. Your head up prior to receiving the ball, so then you are aware of where your teammates are, where the opposition is, where the space is. The more aware you are, the quicker you'll make decisions. Some of the things you can do and we can focus on now is things like playing one touch and moving. So you're not moving for the sake of moving, you're moving to move somebody out or bring someone with you, clearing space. So that's why one touch and two touch football is really good if you're doing it properly. Okay, if you're really focusing on getting as much as you can out of it, it's really useful. As I mentioned before, well aware, obviously, COVID situations brought in restrictions. It's not easy to play a small sided game. And that's why I talked about last few weeks about doing some of the reaction drills and improvising, not for every training sessions, but you divide your sessions up and you focus on different components of the game. Use a profile to look for your weaknesses, your strengths, we sort of touched on earlier. But the point being is that last week we touched on, if you recall, different color cones. So, okay, you can put different color cones, one either side, 10 yards either side, one behind you. And as the ball gets played into you, you have the person who's played the ball in shout a color, and you've got to then receive either run to that cone, pass. What you can do is improvise even more. So you can sort of have a red cone, a blue cone, a yellow cone, and one represents, the red cone might represent a long pass. So if you're standing here, the player's 10, 15 yards, 20 yards away. As they play it in, they shout red. When you receive, you turn and you shoot. If they shout blue, as it comes in, then it forces you to look behind you where the blue one is, and maybe you can pass, or maybe you can run. And then if you've got the opportunity, if someone can behind you and move the cones around, so you don't get a mental map, you've got to continuously think. The ball can get played in 20, 30 yards. So then you can even practice receiving it and moving in direction where you're going as well. So there's sort of key things and suggestions, obviously, that can help with that, to improvise based on the situation at the moment. Or even if you're sort of on your own, you play against the wall, you play the ball against the wall, and you've got, 10, get a few footballs, play it against the wall. As the ball comes back in again, you've got some cones lined up behind you, look back as if you're on your own, and you pass it. And all that's going to help with the main objective, the prioritizing. You can obviously, the ideal situation would be the small-sided games, but obviously it's not possible. There are things that you can do and work on the coaches. My role obviously is the mind. I have a background obviously in neuropsychology and other things, sports performance conditioning. So I put it out there, and I mentioned earlier, it's not about sort of just working through a book. It's about being pragmatic and looking for ways to improve these key fundamentals that are going to eliminate hesitation. So if you hesitate or too many touches on the ball, you're going to lose possession. Someone's going to close you down. Your teammates is closed down. So the idea is obviously to work at speed by doing that, improving your awareness, seeing what's around you. So you can look at what's around you, then in 5 seconds, things have changed. Nothing's going to stay the same on the pitch. People move, people change. And that's why I said earlier, what we're doing here links in. So when I first started, I talked about learning how to read the game. Now, some people might say, okay, do you really need to teach young? Obviously, there's a variable age group here. Some use a little bit older than other people say, well, at what age are you teaching the game? It's just about enjoyment. Well, you do enjoy it, and I think that's the key thing. The earlier you can sort of teach someone, understand formations, read a formation, the more malleable the brain is. So I'm coming at this from the angle of understanding the way the brain works really well. So the idea is that the younger, you see people as young as 5 or 6 play musical instruments and do, so I'm not suggesting that, it's the case to start early to read the game, but certainly as you start approaching, the teenagers, it makes sense to understand what the formation is. Have they changed formation? Not spending a considerable amount of time doing that, but just enough awareness, because that all is going to link together. That's the key. It's all meshed in, it's all linked together. So you go on the field and okay, they're playing 4-1, 4-1, or 4-4-2, or 3-3-3. Relevant, if they've changed their formation as well, that can be quite useful. And that's what we touched on earlier in the program, which is really useful. Obviously, building on that, we become more aware, we can make better decisions. So the exercise really that we're going to focus on, and we'll touch base shortly on these things that we can do. You're obviously a bit more limited than what you normally would be because the COVID restriction, but there's still things to do, and it's still important to cover this as well within the guidelines anyway. So constantly scanning the field, they're sort of key exercises. And the academy whenever I've come out to visit, there's great exercises for that. It may be a question to improvise, depending on how many numbers are allowed to play or whatever. So the awareness, what's around you, a good awareness, you understand the space around you, you understand change that happen in the game, you improve your decision making. Obviously, when you're sort of practicing skills, you can start, unopposed, you get it right, and then you can start bringing the opposed, because then it develops in a skill. But the key fundamental here really is the main outcome is this week. What you can integrate in that progression is, as well as obviously the other work you're doing, because you sort of compartmentalize your sessions. You do your fitness, you do your psych stuff, you do tactical, technical, but you can also build on some of your action work that we've done before. And one of the outcomes is you can grade yourself. So you can grade yourself now. How, out of a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being high, where would you say you are in terms of your awareness of the game, your head up, and being able to see what's around you? How aware are you of your teammates, opposition, and space? Because the more aware you are of that, and the better your technique and the better your skill, then obviously there's a much better chance you're going to be more consistent. And that's the key. And I'm not suggesting by doing this, and we've watched players every week, you're going to emulate that play. I don't know, you might go above and beyond players, you might not, but you will improve, and that's the key, to keep improving. That's the basic key, is we want to do is, continue to improve your game, which is what